saying that's a solar eclipse and things like that. But when you look at the scriptures, it's telling you it's something that was far, far, far beyond anything like that. Because it was a darkness to be felt. Read.
And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days.
So for 3 days, it was pitch black. Read.
They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. And Pharaoh called unto Moses and said, Go ye, serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be stayed. Let your little ones also go with you.
So now he's saying you can leave, but your flocks and your herds are going to stay. So all you're going to leave out with nothing. Everything has to stay here with us.
Yeah, because they had nothing.
So we'll read a little bit about that darkness in chapter 17, the Wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 17, start at verse 1.
All right.
We're going to read about why that wasn't a regular darkness that came upon the land. It was not a sandstorm, because that's one biblical scholar said it was a sandstorm. That's why I said it was a darkness to be felt. They said it was a sandstorm. It was not a sandstorm. It was not a solar eclipse that lasted for 3 days. It was darkness that canceled out the power of the so-called sun god, which was the chief god of the Egyptians.
Darkness.
Read.
This is Wisdom of Solomon 17:1. For great are thy judgments and cannot be expressed. Therefore unnurtured souls have erred. For when unrighteous men thought to oppress the holy nation, they being shut up in their houses, the prisoners of darkness, are fettered with the bonds of a long night.
And fettered
with the bonds of a long night, lay there exiled from the eternal providence.
So it says fettered, because fetters are chains. So it says they were in that one spot, chained by the bonds of a long night. Meaning that when that darkness came upon the land, wherever you were, you stayed in that spot for 3 days. If you were in the field, that darkness came over, you were in that spot for 3 days. If you were in your house, in your room, when that darkness came over, you stayed there and you didn't move for 3 days. And it's going to let you know why they didn't move for 3 days. What happened in that darkness?
Verse 3. For while they supposed to lie hid in their secret sins, they were scattered under a dark veil of forgetfulness, being horribly astonished and troubled with strange apparitions.
So the Most High said this darkness came to punish them for secret sins. And while they were in this darkness, they were troubled with strange apparitions. What is an apparition?
Like visions or appearances.
Exactly. Like you're seeing, like people say ghosts are like apparitions. So you're seeing visions and appearances, not just seeing, but also hearing. Read.
4. For neither might of the corner that held them kept them from fear, but noises as of waters falling down sounded about them, and sad visions appeared unto them with heavy countenances.
So it says that the corner that they cowered in could not save them from the fear that was coming, because they could hear water. Sometimes they heard water coming down around them. And it says sometimes people saw sad visions for people with a heavy countenance. So if you were a person that was sad and depressed, then you saw a manifestation of all your anxieties come up in sad appearances and apparitions before you. Read.
Verse 5. No power of the fire might give them light.
So it's letting you know this is not a sandstorm, this is not an eclipse. No power of fire could bring them light. You can light a torch, you can have a fireplace, you can have a lantern. Nothing could penetrate that darkness. Read.
Neither could the bright flames of the stars endure to lighten that horrible night.
So if you came outside and looked up, there was no light in the sky. There was no moonlight. There was no starlight. There was no sunlight. There was nothing. Read.
Only there appeared unto them a fire kindled of itself, very dreadful.
So what's more, what happened in those apparitions? They saw a fire, a dreadful fire kindled of itself. An apparition of flames to make them horrified. It's almost as if you sitting in the middle of your darkness, by yourself. You can't see your hand in front of your face, and then a fire just appears right in front of you like it's about to consume you. Read.
For being much terrified, they thought the things which they saw to be worse than the sight which they saw not.
So they said, so the terror was so great that it says the things that they saw to be worse than the sight they saw not. So when they were in complete darkness, as terrifying as that darkness was, it was better than those apparitions that they were going to see in the darkness, because those apparitions were so horrible, they begged for the darkness. Read.
As for the illusions of art magic,
Here we go. As for the illusions of art magic,
they were put down, and their vaunting in wisdom was reproved with disgrace.
so there was nothing that the illusionists and magicians and soothsayers and Chaldeans and sorcerers and astronomers, there was nothing that they could do to counteract the power of this darkness. Read.
For they that promised to drive away terrors and troubles from a sick soul were sick themselves of fear, worthy to be laughed at.
So the Janus, Jambres, all the magicians, the scripture says that they were sick themselves with fear and worthy to be laughed at. So here you have your top magicians cowered on the floor in their spot about to die of fear. The Most High said they were worthy to be laughed at. Read.
For though no terrible thing did fear them, yet being scared with beasts that passed by, and hissing of serpents, they died for fear, denying that they saw the air, which could of no side be avoided.
So it says that they heard the hissing of serpents or saw beasts. The scripture says that they died from fear. There were people whose hearts literally stopped, denying that they saw the air. So he's saying it was nothing but air around them, but they denied that it was just air that was on them at every side, because they heard the sounds of these creatures moving around them.
The Lord scared them to death.
Yeah, they got scared to death.
Literally.
Literally. Verse 11.
For wickedness, condemned by her own witness, is very timorous, and being pressed with conscience, always forecasteth grievous things.
So the scriptures are letting you know that a person with a wicked heart is going to be even more afraid, because their conscience is going to torture them with greater terrors. So it's letting you know that the more wicked you were, the more terror you found in that dark.
Man, that just goes back to a saying that old folks had, that only bad children are scared. Verse 12.
Kadah, here it is.
For fear is nothing else but a betraying of the succours which reason offereth.
For fear is nothing else but the betraying of the succours which reason offereth. So if you want to know what the definition of fear is, that's it. And what does that mean? It means, like, you look at a horror movie. As long as you can make sense of what's going on, you're not going to be afraid. But when you can't make sense of it, it's going to terrify you. You look at an old horror movie, what happened? A creaking. What happened? Oh, that's the house settling. Oh, it's an old house. The house is just settling. Oh, those are the mice going across the ceiling. You know? You hear somebody, woo! Oh, that's just the wind howling outside. As long as you can make it make sense in your mind, you're not afraid. But then you just see something just get up and fly across the room. Now you can't make it make sense. Oh no, I'm in a haunted house.
That's fear.
So when it says, fear is nothing else but the betraying of the succour which reason offereth. Succour is comfort. And as long as you can reason it out in your head, like, okay, I know what that is, then you're not afraid. But once you can't make it make sense, then you're going to be scared. Like some of us have those houses with the AC. You turn the AC on and doors start slamming. Go, 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 go. That never happened to you?
Oh, I grew up like that, bro.
So you know.
I read 12 and 13 together.
Read it.
For fear is nothing else but a betraying of the succours which reason offereth, and the expectation from within being less, counteth the ignorance more than the cause which bringeth the torment.
That's going into the idolatry, right? Because it had said earlier that they were worthy to be punished because of, all of the idolatry and the plagues that was on the land.
Read it, pay attention to what Baja's about to read. Read 12 and 13 together, Baja.
For fear is nothing else but a betraying of the succours which reason offereth.
So 13 is going to continue the same thought. Read.
And the expectation from within being less, counteth the ignorance more than the cause which bringeth the torment.
So which means that because you don't know what it is, you're going to be even more afraid and more tormented because you can't make it make sense. So for example, if when little kids, they see a shadow move across their room, they don't just say, oh, it's a shadow in my room. They say it's a monster. Why? Because the ignorance of what it is, the fact they don't know what it is, means they're going to conjure up in their mind the worst thing it could possibly be. And that's what the Most High is saying about that fear, is that you're going to make it worse because your ignorance is going to conjure up something that's beyond imagination. Verse 14.
Wow. 14. But they sleeping the same sleep that night, which was indeed intolerable, and which came upon them out of the bottoms of inevitable hell.
So, of inevitable hell. So, let's explain. It says, but they sleeping the same sleep that night. Why? Because no matter, remember the darkness came on them for 3 days. There was nobody that could stay up the whole 3 days. So that means they're in the dark, terrified for their life. But as terrified as they are, nobody's going to stay up for those 72 hours. So they're being broken. And as they're breaking, the reason why it says it's coming up for inevitable hell, because the inevitability of sleep is coming to them. They know they got to sleep. Can you imagine that inevitable hell? You got all of this madness going on around you. You in pitch darkness. You hear demons. You hear voices. You hear fallen rocks. You hear creatures. And you're falling asleep.
Said, well, I'll read 14 and 15 together. But they sleeping the same sleep that night, which was indeed intolerable, and which came upon them out of the bottoms of inevitable hell, were partly vexed with monstrous apparitions, and partly fainted, their heart failing them, for a sudden fear and not looked for came upon them.
So they saw apparitions of monsters that came up that was so horrible that the sudden fear made their heart stop and they died. Read.
So then whosoever there fell down was straitly kept, shut up in a prison without iron bars.
So wherever they fell in that darkness, that's where they were going to stay for those 3 days. They could not move. They were in a prison without bars. Fear is that powerful. Read.
For whether he were husbandman or shepherd or a laborer in the field, he was overtaken and endured that necessity which could not be avoided. For they were all bound with one chain of darkness.
So it's letting them know once more, wherever you were, you got caught in that darkness, that's where you were going to be. Whether you were a husbandman in the field, whether you were in the house, wherever you were, when that darkness came down, all the Egyptians were bound with that same chain of darkness. Read.
Whether it were a whistling wind or a melodious noise of birds among the melodious noise of birds among the spreading branches. Spreading, okay. Or a pleasing fall of water running violently. Or a terrible sound of stones cast down. Or a running that could not be seen of skipping beasts. Or a roaring voice of most savage wild beasts. Or a rebounding echo from the hollow mountains. These things made them to swoon for fear.
So it made them to swoon for fear. You know what it means to swoon for fear?
I mean, you just look at
What is a swoon?
Like duck or something?
No, it's a sound.
Oh, like, oh.
That's the word.
Miserable.
You ever see people do that in those old movies? Like, ooh, that's swooning for fear. So can you imagine people? You see it in movies, but there are people that really. Kadar does that. I'm sorry, I was trying to think where have I heard that in real life.
That's it.
I've seen them do that.
That is.
I've heard them do that before. So that like, that's swooning for people.
Especially around wasps.
Verse 20. For the whole world shined with clear light,
Oh my God.
and none were hindered in their labor. Over them only was spread in heavy night an image of that darkness which should afterwards receive them. But yet were they unto themselves more grievous than the darkness.
So it said the whole rest of the world had light. And everybody else in the world got up and was going about their daily duties and doing the things they had to do. So whether it was in Persia or down in Africa or wherever else, there was light. In Goshen with the Israelites, there was light. But only on them was that darkness come upon them, which was a shadow of the death that should receive them afterwards. It says, over them only was spread in heavy night an image of that darkness which should afterwards receive them. An image of that darkness which should afterward receive them.
Yeah.
So that darkness that they saw was a precursor to death itself. Yes, horrible. But it's letting them know. Read on 19 again.
For whether he were husbandman or shepherd or a laborer in the field, he was overtaken and endured that necessity which could not be avoided. For they were all bound with one chain of darkness.
So that goes back to how they were fettered with the darkness. How that darkness put chains upon them and had them bound for that period of time. I really wanted to explain 18. That's why I said read 18. Read it again.
Whether it were a whistling wind or a melodious noise of birds among the spreading branches, or a pleasing fall of water running violently.
So it's telling you that things that would normally not even scare you. Like, so for example, the wind just outside, or the birds just singing a beautiful song, chirping outside, or whether it's like a nice waterfall sound that would normally relax you, those things came and terrified those people and put them in complete fear for them not knowing what it was. Go ahead.
Or a terrible sound of stones cast down, or a running that could not be seen of skipping beasts.
So you hear a herd of beasts just coming running through your house in complete darkness. You don't know if you're about to be trampled, run over, or die, or what, because you're hearing these sounds, or stones falling, like an earthquake, and just stones and boulders falling everywhere. You don't know what's getting ready to happen. Go ahead.
Or a roaring voice of most savage wild beasts.
Or you just hear some lions, you in the house, and you just hear lions roaring, or an elephant, or some animal just getting ready to come and get you. You don't know what it is. Go ahead.
Or a rebounding echo from the hollow mountains. These things made them to swoon for fear.
So like the brother was going into, that had people in there crying and mourning and for that fear. Go ahead.
For the whole world shined with clear light, and none were hindered in their labor. Over them only was spread in heavy night an image of that darkness which should afterwards receive them. But yet were they unto themselves more grievous than the darkness.
So even worse than the darkness was all the things that they were doing to themselves in their own heads. Their own fear and what was in their heads was worse than anything that was actually there, because we already know and understand that what was actually there, nothing.
Let's go right to verse 15.
All right.
Because the Most High is going to show you also the punishment that came on the Egyptians for their idolatry, their worship of those beasts, and what was going on during the plagues as well.
All right. You said 11 and 15?
Yep.
All right. Wisdom of Solomon 11 and 15. But for the foolish devices of their wickedness, wherewith being deceived, they worshipped serpents void of reason, and vile beasts. They did send a multitude of unreasonable beasts upon them for vengeance, that they might know that wherewithal a man sinneth, by the same also shall he be punished. For thy almighty hand that made the world of matter without form wanteth not means to send among them a multitude of bears or fierce lions, or of unknown wild beasts full of rage, newly created, breathing out either a fiery vapor or filthy scents of scattered smoke, or shooting horrible sparks out of their eyes, whereof not only the harm might dispatch them at once, but also the terrible sight utterly destroyed them.
So when you look at what the scripture was saying, is that the Most High, he had the means to bring any form of terror upon them that he wanted. Whether he wanted to bring different beasts on them, whether he wanted to be lions, tigers, or bears, or he says he made everything. So he said that he could also bring creatures newly created that breathe out foul vapors or have filthy scents or shoot sparkles out of their eyes, or that some creatures were so horrible that the sight of them would kill you. Continue.
20. Yea, and without these might they have fallen down with one blast, being persecuted of vengeance and scattered abroad through the breath of thy power. But thou hast ordered all things in measure and number and weight.
Read.
For thou canst show thy great strength at all times when thou wilt. And who may withstand the power of thine arm? For the whole world before thee is as a little grain of the balance, yea, as a drop of the morning dew that falleth down upon the earth.
So he's letting them know, Most High, you can show your great power anytime you want to, but you do it in measure and in balance. So a lot of times when people sit back and they say, well, why don't the Most High just do this? Or why don't the Most High just wave his hand and make this happen? Or why don't he make the Egyptians just disappear? Well, why did he decide to do 10 plagues? And they say all these things that they decide, but the scripture is letting you know that the Most High is doing everything in his judgments in weights and measure and in balance. Read.
23. But thou hast mercy upon all, for thou canst do all things, and winkest at the sins of men, because they should amend. I'll read that again.
Because they should amend.
But thou hast mercy upon all, for thou canst do all things, and winkest at the sins of men, because they should amend. For thou lovest all things that are, and abhorrest nothing which thou hast made, for never wouldst thou have made anything if thou hast hated it. And how could anything have endured if it had not been thy will, or been preserved if not called by thee? But thou sparest all, for they are thine, O Lord, thou lover of souls.
So now let's go back to what happened to the children of Israel during that darkness. Wisdom of Solomon chapter 18 verse 1.
All right, 18 and 1.
Because we just read about the darkness that covered the Egyptians. Now we're going to read about what happened with the children of Israel while the whole world was in that, while all of Egypt was in that darkness.
18 and 1.
18 and 1.
Nevertheless, thy saints had a very great light, whose voice they hearing, and not seeing their shape, because they also had not suffered the same things, they counted them happy.
So they could hear the things that were happening, but they couldn't see the shape. So imagine the Israelites in Goshen looking in Egypt, seeing just pure darkness, not able to make out any shapes, but able to hear them screaming and crying the whole time.
I mean, for a very bad analogy, I'll use, it's like you standing outside of a haunted house and seeing people inside just screaming and yelling for fear. Well, you're right. You just hear everything that's going on inside. You're like, what in the world is going on in there?
Exactly. That would be horrible. That would be horrifying. Read.
2. But for that they did no hurt to them now, of whom they had been wronged before, they thanked them, and besought them pardon for that they had been enemies.
You can read it again.
All right, verse 2 again. But for that they did no hurt them that. But for that they did not hurt them now, of whom they had been wronged before.
Keep going.
They thanked them and besought them pardon for that they had been enemies.
So the Egyptians could not hurt the Israelites anymore. Neither could they do any harm to their enemies. So now it's going to the point where the Egyptians want to reconcile with the Israelites. They basically say they want it to be over. They want to be friends. Like how the scripture said the Egyptians were going to give us gifts, and all the Egyptians feared the children of Israel and admired them and wanted to be them. That's what's going on now because of that plague of darkness.
All right. Because verse 3 is actually going into the things in the wilderness from that point.
Keep going.
Instead, whereof thou gavest them a burning pillar of fire, both to be a guide of the unknown journey, and an harmless sun to entertain them honorably.
Wow.
For they were worthy to be deprived of light, and imprisoned in darkness, who had kept thy sons shut up, by whom the uncorrupt light of the law was to be given unto the world.
So it's letting them know right there. Because they had kept the children of Israel in captivity, they were worthy to be in captivity to that long night. They were worthy to be in bondage under that one chain because of how they kept the children of Israel in bondage.
5. And when they had determined to slay the babes of the saints, one child being cast forth and saved to reprove them, thou tookest away the multitude of their children and destroyest them altogether in a mighty water. Of that night were our fathers certified afore, that assuredly knowing unto what oaths they had given credence, they might afterwards be of good cheer.
So it's letting you know, all the things that were to us for a blessing was to them for a curse. When you look at what explained in verse 3 about how the Most High gave us a pillar of fire to be with us throughout that night, so that we wouldn't have to endure that darkness, but our enemies had to endure that darkness and being bound in those chains. And even then when it spoke about Moses, how the Egyptians put those children to death, but that one child being brought forth, which was Moses, lived to see the vengeance taken on the Egyptians, and how all of their children, first one of their children, were put to death. So before we go too far forward, let's jump back to the book of Exodus.
All right. Exodus 10:24. And Moses called, and Pharaoh called unto Moses and said, Go ye, serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be stayed. Let your little ones also go with you. And Moses said, Thou must give us also sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice unto the Lord our God. Our cattle also shall go with us. There shall not an hoof be left behind. For therefore must we take to serve the Lord our God. And we know not with what we must serve the Lord until we come thither.
So he's saying, listen, we have to go. He said, not one hoof is going to stay of anything that we have. So not one goat, not one horse, not one cow,
ox, nothing.
Nothing is going to remain behind. Bless you, bro. Continue.
All right. Verse 27. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. And Pharaoh said unto him, Get thee from me, take heed to thyself, see my face no more. For in that day thou seest my face, thou shalt die.
So now, Pharaoh for the first time threatens his life. He's like, listen, get thee from my face, come to me no more, and the next time you see me